at the University of Melbourne. He is a fellow of the Australian Academy of Health and Medical Sciences, a fellow of the Australian College of Road Safety, and an advisor on injury to the Director General of WHO. He has worked on numerous national and international projects that have influenced transport policy and worked with both federal and state governments in Australia and internationally. Dr. Stewenson is the Director of Transport, Health and Urban Design Research Lab at the University of Melbourne. Professor, over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's an honour to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you. What I'm going to talk about is reducing road trauma and looking at big data and technology. And so I'm going to talk a little about the future here, rather than just, we know the challenges that you're grappling with, and what I'm going to propose is some new science and some new directions for the future, and ones I think are very important in Sri Lanka that could be adopted to mitigate road trauma. So this point here is challenges in designing road transport systems in the urban age. What we mean by that is by 2050, 70% of the world's population will be living in cities. And your urban form here in Sri Lanka determines to some extent your transport system. And it's predicated on 19th century colonial imperial type infrastructure, and you've been chasing that, trying to ameliorate the challenges associated with a transport system that is very car dependent. And we need to be focused into the future where we're going to have very highly urbanised, Colombo's highly urbanised, Peradeniya and all other areas throughout Sri Lanka will become very urbanised over the next 30, 40 years. And we need to rethink how people in those cities get around, their mobility. And how they get around has to be safe, obviously, and it also has to be very sustainable. And so we must think for the future. Now, we have a whole array of challenges associated with looking to the future in our transport system, and particularly mitigating the levels of road trauma that we're dealing with here in Sri Lanka and elsewhere. So we've got this massive urbanisation that's taking place, but we've also got now, in the 21st century, a digital disruption. It's allowing us, or it's showing us, a whole array of new ways of operating our transport system, using concepts like mobility as a service. There are drones now operating. We have 5G on the horizon in many countries, which means we can have access in our hand in terms of making decisions about how we get around our cities, our countries in a safe manner. Then we've also got, added to that digital disruption, is this big data that is giving us insights we've never seen before. And artificial intelligence has given us quite an insight around how we can utilise our access to that information to ensure that we can deliver safety, to ensure that we can deliver sustainable transport. And that's what we need to be focusing our attention on over the next 20, 30 years. Now, this is just one example that the research lab that I head at the University of Melbourne has been working on using artificial intelligence, and just the new insights that we begin to see from looking at data in a way that we haven't had an opportunity to do, simply because the technology, simply because the data wasn't available at that 2-second or very, very large scale that we have. This study we published recently in a Lancet medical journal, and it was called Global Analysis of Urban Design Types and Road Transport Injury. And we used it's an image processing study. So what we're using here is we spend a lot of time focused around our surveillance systems and collecting data, but there is existing data that is available to all of us now that's pretty standardized. If we use satellite imagery, if we use Google imagery, Google Maps, that allows us to understand the challenges that we have ahead of us. So what we essentially did is take every city in the world, I shouldn't say simply did, but it's a large number of cities that had populations over 300,000, so Colombo was in part of this study, and we looked at Google Maps for those cities, and we standardized those Google Maps. We took 400 by 400 meter square grids of those cities, and we took 1,000 random samples of those 400 by 400 grids of every city that has a population exceeding 300,000. So that was 1,700 cities across the globe, except for parts of South Korea and North Korea. And we looked at their street networks, we looked at their rail transit networks, and we looked at green and blue spaces in those cities. And we stripped the map, so any identifying information that would suggest that it was a Sri Lankan city, for example, or it was a French city. We simply just had the road network grids that the maps pick up, as well as the rail networks. And what we wanted to do was to see whether there was any relationship between a city's urban form and road trauma, road deaths and serious injuries. So this is just an outline examples of the sort of maps that we were processing on scale. We have obviously millions of these maps in our system, but it gives you an insight of what we were just looking at and the types of cities they were. When we then ran our neural networks, our artificial intelligence across these huge array of data, it did for the first time show us clusters of cities. 9 distinct clusters of cities came up. And we named those, these various 9 lists here, 9 names that we've got here. And they really, for the first time, basically what it was saying is there was something unique about those road networks and public transport networks that meant they clustered together when you undertook the neural network AI. So if I look at this slide here, I think we have only just one bit block on it, but what I highlighted here was really mean. Probably not very clear here, you may not be able to read it. But if you look at, I've highlighted two city types. The one of them was a motor city, and the other is the large blocks. The cluster 6 motor city is the cities that are predominantly, if we're thinking about Asia Pacific cities, they were mostly the Australian and New Zealand cities that were very car-dependent cities. In Colombo, Sri Lanka, the clusters that Colombo fell into were these cluster 3, which are called large blocks, which says that they are medium density cities, formal low and high capacity road networks, and medium rail transport. So that's the city type that Sri Lankan cities fell into. It's interesting to see when we were doing this objectively without any preconceived ideas around city form, that there was this distribution across the globe of the clusters. You can see the motor cities, which Australian cities predominantly were. They were very prevalent in North America, Canada, and the US. They're newish cities. They're cities where cars, they evolved around the development of the motor vehicle. But you can see in this picture here that Sri Lanka is very similar to many of the Indian cities, and that we get a variety of cities in Africa and in South America. They're quite similar to the Spanish cities, and there's historical reasons for that. So it's fascinating that just by looking at data and big data, for the first time using new technologies and new approaches, we're starting to see some links between how our city is developed and how we deliver our transport. So as I said, this is just another example that I can just zoom in on it. But basically what I was highlighting was just that there was some uniformity in city designs across countries as well. So when we looked at plotting this information against the rates of road deaths and serious injuries, what we begin to see is if you had to start to design a transport network or transport system with little money now, this gives you a first take as to what sort of city type you probably would want to design to ensure that you didn't have high rates of road deaths and serious injuries. And in this instance here, it shows on the top here that light blue was overall road deaths and serious injuries. Then there was the cyclists, the motorcyclists, the pedestrians. And you can see that the yellow bars also is the level of infrastructure that has been implemented in those cities for transport. And so you can see cluster 5 has the greatest level of infrastructure investment. That means they've invested a significant amount in terms of road networks, significant amount in terms of rail. And you can see that they deliver the best in terms of reduced rates of road deaths. And those are typically sort of the European cities. But if you look at cluster 3, you would also see that actually they don't invest a lot they haven't invested in infrastructure to the same extent as say Europe, but their rates of road deaths and serious injuries are also much lower, almost the same. And those are cities like Tokyo, the big, highly densified cities that have invested heavily in public transit, but also have a very tight road network where you do not have massive high speeds and large road networks like in the US. So that was just one example of using new data to begin to explore the future for our transport systems and how best to design for safety. And I think that was a really useful piece. This next example I'm going to give you now is using technology to change driver behaviours. And we're starting to, the reason I want to present this piece is that we're seeing for the first time a really useful intervention that changes drivers' behaviours significantly in terms of reducing their risk taking. And we know that when we potentially put some financial incentive into it, it could actually lead to reductions in road deaths and serious injuries. So that's what we're looking at now. How much time I've got? I have to skip through that. But this is using telematics technology. Telematics is purely a combination of telecommunications and informatics, and it can be now developed so that it's part of your phone, It's an app on your phone, and it tracks how you drive. It tells you where you're driving, it shows how hard you brake, how hard you speed, how high you speed, when you exceed posted speed limits, those sorts of things. And so it's this combination here. I'm going to skip over some of this because I'm probably running out of time. But it's an important component. Everyone has a smartphone mostly now. It's an opportunity where you can use this technology to capture how a driver is driving. And we refer to it as the driver's DNA. So it just simply looks like that. It gives scores to the driver about how they drive, and it rates them compared to other drivers as well. And what we're finding is we've run a whole array of experiments where we've actually worked out, first of all, if you just give feedback to the driver about how well they're driving, does that change their behaviours? Do they improve? Do they not speed as much? Do they not exceed posted speed limits? Well, we know from our experiments that it doesn't cut it. Telling people just to improve their driving when they're not as good as other drivers doesn't change their driving behaviours. So our experimental work's shown that. But what we are finding really exciting is that when we combine feedback to the driver through a phone app, and you put money with it, financial incentive, you can influence their driving behaviour significantly. And what we're talking about here is low-cost financial incentives, akin to like an insurance that an insurance company might provide. And so we're showing that with this technology application and with behavioural economics, we can actually begin to change drivers' behaviours quite significantly. And we've shown that in relation to, again, randomised control trials. This is the sort of work I do all the time, randomised trials with epidemiologists. There's a robust method, and we've shown, I'm skipping through this, but we're showing these sorts of significant differences up here on the right. When you combine an incentive with feedback, you get significant changes in their driving behaviour, and risky driving behaviours reduce significantly. So, what we're in the throes of doing now in Melbourne is a very large trial where we actually look to see, are we not just changing behaviours, but are we reducing crashes? And so we're now doing a very large trial looking at crash reduction. The reason I want to present that sort of overview of that study as well is that it has applications in Sri Lanka. It's a type of intervention you can scale up in a huge way. It's one that's linked to insurance, which has sustainability in that regard. It's being robustly experimented, and we're showing that it influences, right? It can change drivers' behaviour in terms of how they're performing in their own network, and it could be rolled out very quickly. So we're getting a lot of interest in this type of experiment and this type of intervention. Through addition to what I presented earlier around how do we need to change our urban form and our transport systems, but in this instance, this is something we